So the beauty and the beast there. We have the beauty of pollinators and is this thing on? Is this on? Okay, it's on. So you know, we saw the beauty of the pollinators, flowers, what they're pollinating. Joe, you're telling me you can't hear. Can people in the back here?
I can hear you.
Can't hear you very well.
You can try these too.
You might turn up the.
These might be these
Okay.
really sensitive mics.
Let me try this.
You want to try this?
How about try this? Sorry, technology again. We're trying to. Oh, look at that! Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. So you know, we've heard about the pollinators. We've heard about bees. We've heard about monarch butterflies and the sort of charismatic pollinators that they're in danger. And so we saw that in this video. We read about it in the press, and there's a lot of conflicting information that comes out. You know, we hear some science that says, oh, you know, the problem is this. The problem is, well, the problem for beekeepers is that it's all about the mites, that they're not controlling their mites. Other people say it's all about the pesticides. Other people say it's not enough food. Well, you know, the reality is it's probably all of those things in terms of bees, but it managed bees. But then, you know, we've also got native bees. We've got butterflies. We've got bats. We've got birds. We've got lots of different kind of pollinators that are all challenged. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. But some of the reasons are, you know, just simply there's not enough food. So we need to think about that. There's not enough food for lots of different reasons. Development pressures, herbicides, killing indiscriminately. Some of it is climate change. You know, the changing climate is changing what kinds of plants are available. It's changing habitats. It's changing where pollinators can be living. So, you know, then there's also insecticides. So we talk about herbicides, but there's also insecticides. Some of the problem with insecticides is direct exposure. You know, insecticides on insects, well, it kills them. And it kills all insects. But some of it is the chronic exposure. That chronic exposure for pollinators can do all kinds of damage long term. You may not see right away, but you might see it over the long term. So, you know, it's not a simple answer, and it's not a simple solution. And there's not one simple villain here in this situation. But tonight we're going to talk about why pollinators are important. We're going to talk about what's sort of the current lay of the land, what's going on, a bit about the science, and the challenges of developing and managing the strategies to protect them, and talk about things that we can be doing ourselves in our own backyards to protect our pollinators, both at home and in our communities. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel, and I think you're going to want to use one of these mics. So first up is, look at my cheat sheet here. So I think what I will do is I'll introduce the whole panel, and I think what I'd like to do is ask people to, unless it's really urgent, hold your questions until the end, because we're going to have plenty of time at the end for conversation and discussion. And so if people can get through their presentations, then we'll have some discussion. So just think about what your questions are, write them down, do whatever you need to do. So we're going to start with Rella Abernathy, Dr. Abernathy. She's the Integrated Pest Management Coordinator for the City of Boulder, has been since 2009. She has a PhD in entomology. She also serves on the leadership team for People and Pollinators Action Network and is on the board of Beyond Pesticides. Prior to joining the City of Boulder, she worked at the EPA's pesticide program on sustainable agriculture and pesticide reduction policy. After Rella, we're going to have David Bell. David Bell is just celebrated his 1 month anniversary with the City of Longmont as the Natural Resources Manager. And in this role, he's responsible for managing the city's parks, agricultural land, urban forestry, greenways, and wildlife. He's going to be focused a lot on flood recovery, especially at Sandstone Ranch. And prior to working with the city, and this is where many of us first met him, he was for 19 years with Boulder County Parks and Open Space. Most recently, he's the Agricultural Resources Manager. He has an undergraduate degree in wildlife biology from CSU and a master's in resources law studies from DU. So he's going to be able to talk about both the city of Longmont and not representing them, but his experiences with the county in terms of agricultural issues that I think come up in Boulder County a lot. And then Beth Conway is the president of the Colorado State Beekeepers Association. She has been for the last 5 years, and before that, she was president of the Northern Colorado Beekeepers Association. She's also co-chair of People and Pollinators Action Network, and serves on the board of directors of Pollinators Stewardship Council, a national organization. She operates Bee Squared Apiaries, a chemical-free 60-hive beekeeping business in Berthoud, which produces terrific honey, gorgeous beeswax candles, and indulgent soaps. Okay. And then Chad Street here is here in Longmont with Bees and Trees. He's been keeping bees for about 10 years and doing removal and relocations for about the same amount of time. He's on the board for Bee Safe Boulder and does a lot of local education and organizing around pollinator protection. So that's your panel for this evening. And we're going to kick it off with Rella, who does have a PowerPoint presentation, so we need to cue that up.
My best to see that. Control. I'll go short again then. Okay, and these are a little toggle. Let's see if I can see my slides. Okay, so let's see where my presentation is. It's coming. Yeah. That's it. Okay, I'm going to probably have to stand so that I can control my slides. Does this mic come on?
It should. Yeah, it has to wait till it goes bad.
Okay, so I'm Rella Abernathy, and I work for the city of Boulder.
Well, you may want to just turn it around and stand on the other side of the podium.
Yeah, that's
a good idea.
okay.
Sorry about the logistics again.
Yeah,
We had it all worked out over at the library.
And then I can turn this around and I can see it. So a lot of the work I do for the city revolves around pesticide reduction policy. The city has had an integrated pest management program in place since the late 80s, which is based on ecologically sound principles. Instead of really focusing on killing pests, we're really focusing on putting optimal conditions in nature to try to have practices in place that help create environments where the plants that we want to live thrive and then aren't so great for the plants that we don't want to live or the insects that we don't want to live there. So that's mainly what I do. What I want to talk tonight about, okay, there. Some of the stuff that I have planned to say are things that Sue already talked about. But I'll just go over this quickly on why are the bees dying? And as Sue said, this isn't a straightforward question. A lot of the things that people are having controversy about, there's no reason to have controversy. There are really many more things than one thing wrong. But the things that we know are contributing and interacting together to kind of create a perfect storm is just flowers. There are something like 40% fewer flowers than there were a few decades ago. There's just nothing for bees to eat or other animals who rely on flowers. And so there's just not only a lack of flowers, but a lack of diet breath. And just like us, they need to have multiple types of pollen and nectar resources to be healthy. Climate change is another big one. Not only are the insects moving around and the plants moving around, they're not in synchrony. So sometimes the bees will be out, there'll be nothing for them to eat. And one weird thing that we don't think about is, insects that are bees, like bumblebees that used to be fairly specific on what they pollinated, are now becoming more general. So they're going to common flower resources with lots of other bees and insects. And researchers are finding now that they're picking up diseases there, that those, what they call watering holes in those common flower resources are actually making it more likely for them to transmit diseases. And diseases are a problem for various reasons. Some are exotic invasive diseases that have come into the country, things like bumblebees that we brought into work greenhouses. Of course, everybody's heard about varroa mite. And that's also interacting together. The diseases get picked up by mites or other vectors. The pesticides are also involved. Not only are bees dying directly and other pollinators directly from pesticides, but the pesticides weaken their immune systems so that they're more susceptible to disease. They change their behaviors, so when they're grooming, they may not be able to groom themselves to get rid of the mites, and so they're more likely to have a mite infestation. So all of these things interact together to cause major problems. But unfortunately, it's not just honeybees. Besides native bees and other pollinators, all other living things on the earth are disappearing at an incredibly fast rate. And I'm sorry to bring you a lot of bad news tonight, but we have to face up to what's happening in order to do something about it. And a lot of conservation biologists are telling us we're running out of time. So butterflies all over the world are disappearing. Aquatic insects like dragonfly, mayfly larvae are in terrible trouble. And when you think about the cascading effect that causes, fish and amphibians eat those insects, and birds, and you start having problems where how many species can disappear before you start having the whole system collapse. These animals here, the baby otters and plovers and turtles and northern leopard frog are all endangered species here in Colorado, and that fish too. So if we look at the trends over time, the dotted line at the bottom is the background extinction rate. These are all vertebrates, but you can see mammals, birds, vertebrates of all types are all disappearing around the world. And insects are disappearing. We all know that. I mean, just think about most of us in this room are a little older, and remember when we were kids and you drive and your windshield would just be splattered with insects. You couldn't drive any distance at all. There's just not insects out there anymore. They're all disappearing. So it's not just bees. Beetles are really hard hit. That bottom red line is what's happening to other invertebrates, and the lepidopterans are disappearing. So we have this complicated web of life where everything's dependent on each other. And so that's one reason why we need to try to look at this in a more holistic way. So this is kind of an interesting project where this photographer, whose name I can't remember right now, there's this project where he went all around the world and he took a cubic foot and photographed everything that came through it. That kind of gives you kind of an idea of what the biodiversity is at different sites. And this is kind of the typical thing you'd expect to find in a healthy ecosystem. Multiple plants, insects, all different types of invertebrates, fungi, and all kinds of other living things. And as you start having those things, the base of that food chain starts disappearing. Of course, you have the upper levels collapse, which is what we're seeing. This is a new book that just came out. That's where E.O. Wilson, most of you probably know who E.O. Wilson is. He's been around a long time. He's one of the top conservation biologists in the world. And he and some of the other older guys like Paul Ehrlich are really working hard to try to use their years of experience to try to find some way of turning this thing around. And I haven't started reading this yet, but his supposition is that the habitat is so important to preserving the species and turning things around with bees and all other animals that we have to really make a concerted effort as a planet to start setting aside habitat. And he's thinking now 50% is a number, and that sounds crazy, but there are a lot of people who are starting to do those projections and think if we have the will to do it, we can actually do that. So that's what some of the solutions are that people are looking at. So the main drivers of this extinction that we're experiencing, they use HIPPO as the acronym. And so in the habitat here, they're talking about global warming in that too, that a lot of the habitat destruction, and it's also fragmentation and degradation of quality of habitat is a problem. So we're invasive species. Population, we have as our human population has grown, the extinction chart is following that same trend. Pollution of all different types, including pesticides and over-harvesting. So what can we do? Well, actually, we can all do something right now. It isn't like we have to wait around for these huge swaths of habitat to start being set aside. We can start setting an example and setting aside habitat right now. So if we think about where habitat destruction has occurred, it's occurring in urban areas, like where we live. All you have to do is look around and see all the buildings, roads, and swaths of plants that aren't suitable for wildlife. And farms. We think about how much land we have in agriculture. We have hundreds of millions of acres planted in things like corn, for example, is like 95 million acres. Soybeans are close to that, like 80, 85 million. So we have whole sections of the middle of the country where the habitat is just gone for millions of acres. So we can all start now in our own yards, because we're finding now, and studies are being released as we speak. One just came out showing that how important it is for the insects that thrive in urban environments in certain types of habitat. So when we think about insects and animals, birds and other animals moving across the landscape, and they come to these cities, lots of times that's kind of a barrier. So what we need to do is start planting native plants, because native plants, all of our native pollinators, birds and other animals, that's their food source, and that's how we can help them. Other people will talk more about how to create pollinator gardens, but besides native plants, we need to make sure that we're kind of messy. You don't want to have mulch and weed cloth where they can't get to the ground. A lot of these little solitary bees will nest in the ground. They nest in stems, so it's important to leave up your stems of your plants from the previous year so that they have a proper habitat. But I want to this is in Brazil, but I just want to, this is a great visual of what fragmentation does. So even if you have habitat in little plots, a lot of insects and birds, but especially insects and a lot of these little solitary bees, don't travel very far. And if you have them in they call like the island effect, they can't move. So not only do we need habitat, we need it connected, we need corridors. So what we can do now, besides putting habitat in our own yard, is start working with our neighbors to see that they have habitat too, that there's connectivity. And this is taken from the website of a group called Pollinator Pathway in Seattle, and they have some really great examples of neighbors working together to put with city authorities to put big pollinator pathways through the city. And I'm starting to work on that in Boulder with our the various departments, and our hope is that we can start making corridors all the way through the city that animal life and pollinators can follow, and work with the public to put those in their yard too. So what they're showing in this one diagram, which will be to the left, is what it's like naturally, where animals just kind of move around with rich ecosystems of lots of species, and they can move randomly and from habitat to habitat. But in modern landscapes, everything's kind of separated. So what we want to do is start finding little corridors through that in order for bees and other animals to move. So the solution is to changing things, to reversing this and saving a lot of the species that are disappearing, is just giving them a place to live with food, shelter, water, all the things that all living things mean, and that's habitat. So we can start right now, this spring, we can go home and we can start planting native plants in our yards. And there's tons of support. There's all kinds of people from groups like Habitat Heroes, the county has information, the Butterfly Pavilion. There's tons of resources where you can get information about how to do that in your yard. We also need to ask of our public officials that they help too by doing roadside plantings to get habitat along roadsides. And ask that our local governments make better use of their public lands. We need to look at how we're using our parks, our urban parks, and our urban spaces. And buying your food. If you're buying food that's grown in these big industrial, agricultural farms that are destroying habitat in the center of the country, it's going to continue happening. So think about buying sustainably grown food, and the lower you eat down the food chain, the less food has to be grown. So that's another thing to think. So we need to really work together long term to come up with these pathways. So this is kind of like what a lot of Americans think of as being the perfect yard, and this is a pollinator desert. There's nothing there to eat, and on top of it, I took this picture off a landscape company's website. They have a system where they apply 4 or 5 times a year a whole cocktail of herbicides, pre-emergence, post-emergence, fungicides, insecticides for grub control. There's nothing alive there. The soil is dead. There's nothing there. So remember that guy that took the picture of the cube where there were all the plants and animals? This is one of his that's taken in the middle of a cornfield. So that tells you what happens to biodiversity in a cornfield. One plant, corn, he found one little tiny mushroom and then these like little ants wandering through, and that's pretty much it, this little mite. And that's probably what that lawn looks like that we just saw in the picture, if you were to get down and look. So the soil, healthy soil is so important because that's how we support good plant growth, that's how we support sustainable agriculture. And there's a whole microcosm of life down there, and if you apply all these pesticides, not only are you going to kill the pests, but you're going to kill your soils and all the living organisms in them. So plant habitat, that is so important that it's pesticide free. I'm not going to go into details about specific pesticides. You can, if we have time and anybody has questions, we can talk about that. But we know it's important to avoid pesticides, but especially the systemic pesticides that go throughout the plant are not only going to cause toxicity, it can be incurred high enough levels to kill them outright, but they're going to cause chronic long-term problems. So that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Anyway, so thank you, Rilla. We're just gonna go right from one speaker to the next rather than doing questions. We'll save the questions till the end. So,
Okay.
David, so next you don't have a presentation, right?
PowerPoint? No.
No. Okay.
Okay. I think I'll go up there though.
Yeah.
So I can face them and
Yeah.
talk. And we'll just kind of take turns doing that.
So I'm doing this out slides, so old school, I guess. I guess I want to thank Sue and the group that brought us here tonight too, People Pollination Action Group, because it does give us a chance to bring the community together and talk about things I think from Sue's presentations to Rella's, I think we all share and have common interest in, that's preserving our pollinators and preserving our environment out there. And again, I'm probably going to echo a lot of the same stuff that Sue and Rella have already talked about. And the thing I hope I can do is maybe at the end of mine wrap it up with things that we as the county and the city are doing to help implement some of the things that Rella talked about. But the first thing, again, I think probably I'll start doing this, is the idea that it's going to sound like a broken record, but for me as a wildlife biologist, my background, it is about habitat. And that habitat has a couple components. One is the quantity and one is the quality. So you can have habitat, but if you're introducing things that are there to are going to kill insects, that's something you have to think about. So the first thing I want to ask you guys is agricultural land, a cornfield, really habitat?
No.
But what about 100 acres of organic kale?
No.
What about a mall?
No.
No, we make lots of land use decisions that really impact our pollinators out there and the rest of the environment. I'm going to probably jump ahead now because you brought it up, but it really is, how do we minimize that impact on our local wildlife? I'm going to keep saying wildlife because our pollinators are a piece of that. And I think when we talk about pollinators, our European honeybees are something people think about a lot of times. You see those videos and the honey and pollination aspects of them. But again, especially in Colorado, thinking about our native pollinators and how we preserve them in the habitat is so important. So we have buildings, we have agriculture, we have insecticides. So who would agree that insecticides kill bees? Right there too. So how do we minimize those sorts of impacts? And that's one of the things that, again, instead of jumping into all the things that we know are impacts of pollinators, I talked a little bit about what we're doing to kind of offset that. Because that's my feeling too, and that E.O. Wilson book is a great example of kind of my philosophy, that we are going to have impacts as a species. We like to eat, we like to have shelter, we like to have places to do our shopping. So if we do that, how do we offset that? So the first thing we do, I think that I kind of push people on a little bit, we want to shrink the footprint of those other activities. And one of those is the agricultural piece. And I will be honest that I think that we should use as much technology as we can to try to get as much food off the smallest footprint that we can. So instead of trying to say that we need to have habitat in a cornfield, we have additional habitat that we really can set aside and make habitat. The county and the city have both been doing this as they purchase agricultural land. And one of the things they've done is taken those lands that have been less than productive in agriculture and actually turn them back into habitat. So some of the areas we looked at, the county has taken over 2,000 acres, it was dry land farms, and turned that back into habitat. So again, creating large-scale habitat is one of the things that we can definitely do, and the city and the county are both doing. The other piece we can really do is integrated pest management, and that's something Rella talked about, and her background is really strong in that. The city and county are both looking at, we know if it's agriculture, if it's people's backyards, or if it's a neighborhood park, there are certain insects that we don't want out there. They carry disease, carry vectors, and again, they reduce the amount of food we get off that farmland. So what can we do to maximize that, but also minimize it? So one of the things we're actually doing is the integrated pest management within the city and the county. So the first thing you want to do is, if you don't have to spray, you don't spray. So going out and scouting your fields and making sure you actually have the pests you're looking for in numbers that are going to have some sort of impact that you want to treat for. Once you decide you have those insects, then what can you do? Can you do biological control? Can you do mechanical control? And as a last measure, you're going to go ahead and use a pesticide. When you use that pesticide, you have a suite of pesticides you could be using. So what we want to look at is what's the least harmful and least impactful to other species out there. So that would be the last thing you want to do is use your pesticides. We want to use one that has the least impact. The county started a program that started at Cornell University. It's an environmental impact quotient. So it actually starts looking at pesticides that you can actually compare across organic, conventional practices and say, what can we use out there that has the lowest impact on the environment or on the water or on the surrounding ecosystem as well. So using that integrated pest management is something that's become very important to all the agencies out there. On top of just taking native land that you said we're going to take out of agriculture and put it back into forage, you know you're going to have that footprint of agriculture out there. So what's around that agriculture? The things you can do to increase habitat around those agriculture areas. Really talked about those little islands out there and the fact that some of these insects can't get around really well, but we also know that having those little forage areas out there and some of those deserts actually is a benefit too. So going ahead and taking some of those areas that maybe are not in agriculture, but they're along the sides of agricultural fields and putting them into habitat as well. So we have forage out there throughout the season. The county and the city are looking at ways of creating seed mixes that actually have more forbs in them than we used to. We still grow a lot of grasses. Now we're including forbs, a lot more native forbs. We're actually growing out forbs locally so that we can include those native forages in there. And with those, we want something that blooms early throughout the year so you have that variety that Rella talked about. Because again, you think about some of the things that we see with our European honeybees. In agriculture, sometimes say, well, there is agriculture that can be beneficial to pollinators as trade-offs. So if you think about the almond orchards in California, lots of forage, but it comes in one big shot, it's one type of food, and when it's gone, it's gone. So again, how do you create that diversity of food, color, and forage of the year? So the city and the county are both looking at how we incorporate that more into our system. The other thing we're wanting to do is figure out what our pollinators look like out there. One of the things we talk about, again, decrease in pollinators in the area. So we want to see what's happening in our area. One of the things that we look at is research throughout the country, and we know that Iowa looks different than the Front Range of Colorado. So as we look at that, what are our pollinators right now? So the city and the county have started programs, so they've brought in researchers to start doing some monitoring on pollinators. So Dr. Kearns and Oliveris out of CU have been doing some studies on county property, and the city will be partnering with them to look at the number of pollinators that they have in Boulder County to help us get a baseline number. We also are engaging volunteers to start doing some of this citizen science that help us look at what our pollinators are out there in the open space areas in our agricultural lands. And as we have that, what can we do to enhance that? So we're actually using volunteers also then to go out and put up pollinator boxes, because that quantity and quality piece also has another component, and that's that special needs. So we talked about leaving things kind of messy. So you can leave native things out there like wood debris and stuff around areas, allow them to have that nesting area. We also put up boxes that allow for them to nest in. So we've been working with volunteers to put up nesting boxes around the county as well. Rella talked about, again, that idea of those islands, and we definitely recognize as a piece of it, but we also want to look to see how we can have that connectivity as well. So within the county, one of the groups that we started was the Pollinator Action Team, and that group actually was started looking at what different groups within county open space was doing. So was there a wildlife biologist, a planning ecologist, or our CSU extension agents, what was actually happening out there? And if we're going to do that, how can we have habitat that, if we're doing a project, that we can make it connected to the next one? And as we looked at it in the area, we started saying, can we start working with other agencies? So one of the things we definitely want to do is work with the city of Boulder and Longmont and the county now, see if we can start working on some of those corridors that Rilla talked about to see if we can make sure we have that movement of pollinators up and down at least Boulder County. If we can go beyond Boulder County, that would be great as well. Another piece we want to do is again is look at that quality as well. So we're looking at through the city and the county soil to see if the soils we have out there are healthy and if they are carrying contaminants with them through the water into non-agricultural areas. So again, shrinking that footprint means keeping the agriculture on that area. So if you're using pesticides or fertilizers, you don't want them leaving the farm and ending up in those areas that we're trying to encourage pollinators. So again, these are just new studies we're starting, trying to get those baselines and incorporating them into what's really happening out there on our landscape. And again, I think we'll have plenty of time for questions out there. One of the things I think was just amazing is I switched over from the county and all the things we're doing there to moving over to the city. I asked my new staff today to kind of pull up a list of the things that they were doing. I'm not going to read them all, but I was actually a little confused on the two papers because they look almost identical. So it really is an idea that agencies here along the Front Range are doing so much to look at how they can conserve habitat, how they keep pesticide use minimum, and how they can enhance habitat as they go along. With that being said, the other thing that I'd like to kind of end on is the fact there's some encouraging information here in Boulder County that again, we're not in the middle of Iowa. We don't have 90% of our landscape in corn. We have done a better job of doing that. So Boulder County, within our county boundaries, 60% of our land has been protected through city, county, state, and national programs that have protected a lot of habitat out there. So if you look at what's happening on the ground, some of the studies that come back from Boulder County was a bumblebee study that Dr. Kristen Oliveris did too. And in 2010, they went out and surveyed bumblebees in Boulder County. The first year, 2010, they found 17 different species. 2011, they found 18 species. 2012, they found 20 species. In 2013, they found 21. So they're actually seeing increases in the number of the bumblebees that are finding in Boulder County, which again is encouraging for one group of pollinators out there. They also went back and they found a study that was done 100 years ago. Well, actually it was 100 years ago in 2007. They found research that showed a researcher back in 1907 that started collecting information on pollinators in a certain area. They were able to find that area again, go back to that area, and do the same sort of study. So in 1907, that researcher found 116 species of pollinators. They came back 100 years later to that study, and how many species do you think they found?
16.
16? Anyone else?
5.
Nope.
40.
So get 40? They found 110.
Oh.
So again, one of the things they're finding that fact that even that difference of 6 species from 116 to 110, they figured through natural diversity with changing climates, with competition, that that's something they probably would expect to find. But they really base it again on that fact that Rella talked about with the E.O. Wilson study, is having habitat set aside where you have good, healthy habitat for your pollinators really pays off. So in Iowa, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably wouldn't find that same sort of result 100 years later from what they found in Iowa to what they found today. But in Boulder County, because our local and state governments have done such a good job of one, protecting land, and two, now I think following up and making sure that we're respecting that land and doing it in a way that respects our wildlife, our pollinators, and habitat, we're seeing some at least encouraging results from Boulder County, and so I hope that we can continue to do. That's it.
So we had a request to do some Q&A now, and then do it again after the next two speakers, because I guess some people felt like there's a lot of information here to absorb and wanted to ask their questions. So I'm going to do just take a few minutes of Q&A right now. If you've got some questions specifically directed at either Bella or David, or general overall questions before we go on to the next two speakers, who are going to focus a little bit more on what you can do and those kinds of things. So are there any burning questions right now? I'll start here.
David, you mentioned growing the maximum amount of food in a small footprint. And the way we measure how much food you grow is bushels per acre.
Yes.
But since it's food, it seems to me that nutrition per acre would be a better measure. Would you be open to measuring nutrition per acre? You would have to test the food and see if it had any nutrition in it. I suspect that chemically grown food does not have very much nutrition in it. And I think that would be a bit of information possibly that we could all use.
I would not disagree. I think having the best quality food is gonna be an important piece, and right now you say we do measure in bushels. Calories are another way to do it, nutrition is another way, and I think as, you come back there, can you guys hear me in the back?
Yeah.
That, I think as farming and people that are, being in Rella talk about this too, I think we keep overlapping a little bit too, as people are making food choices and the type of food they're looking at doing. Nutritional value food is something I think more and more people are looking at when they're buying the type of food that they're purchasing, but I wouldn't disagree. But right now, I think the way that we definitely are quantifying food is in bushels.
I was just wondering if you, or if anybody's doing research on dead bees, like if you find a carcass and you want to see if there's mites on it, or.
So the county, and it's been a little challenging because when you're studying, the question was, are we looking at dead bees and what's really causing that? The county was partnering with the state of Colorado Department of Ag actually is doing hive monitoring, and they're going out and looking at hive health, looking at the wax, looking at the honey, and they're looking at dead bees as well. So we were looking to see if we could do a little bit more robust study in Boulder County. It's just a challenge because you have to actually work with people that have hives. They're willing to let the government get into their hive and do that work. So it's something we'll continue to look at, but the state of Colorado has been looking at that.
How long ago?
Probably it's been going on for 3 years. The county, we have had results back the last 2 years, and again, it's not my results, so I leave the state, but the state has been doing all that, so I think if we could probably pull that up and get that to you, we could do that.
She's gonna answer, Bella's gonna answer that question in a bit first, and then we're gonna go up to you.
I just want to say that we don't have a whole lot of testing around here, but there are many, many studies, and I have friends who have studied the pesticides that are in bees that are dead, or in beeswax or honey in other areas. And we also have some studies done out in eastern Colorado by the USGS where they looked at the number of pesticides in native bees that they found in native bees. And it's frightening. I mean, they're seeing sometimes up to 17 different pesticides in one bee. And why that's a big deal is that a lot of these interact. They're what's called synergistic. So some of the fungicides, for instance, can take something that's already incredibly toxic in tiny doses, like a neonicotinoid, and make it orders of magnitude more toxic. And they're finding those combinations. They're also finding those combinations in as the bees are coming out of the almond areas. Susan Kegley has tested a number of the big commercial beekeepers' hives as they come out. So the bees are carrying, and there's another study that just came out in Europe. The bees are carrying huge, significant loads of pesticides. There's no question about that.
Thank you.
Yes, David gave an optimistic view of increase in species, but how about pure volume and numbers of pollinators?
They don't have the abundance data.
They didn't have abundance. It was diversity and not abundance. So the numbers they had was actually diversity and not abundance because they didn't know what the numbers were.
We don't have abundance numbers?
We did not have. That's what they're actually looking at right now. The studies we're looking at is we don't really have that information. So back when they did the study 100 years ago, it was basically just number of species. So it was diversity. So that's what the study looked at, is they were still seeing the same diversity.
And one of the things they found, and this is just bumblebees, these are bumblebee experts, is they checked at different elevations, because we're in Boulder County. So the higher elevations, as you came from higher to mid to lower elevations, which would be around the urban interface. The number of species that they found went down. And when I asked them about that, I said, are there just fewer species found, at the lower elevations, or is that because of human impacts? And they can't say for sure, but they're assuming that it's human impacts.
Gee, I'm gonna go over here and then go over here. So
You talked about what we can do in our own yards. Do you have lists of plants available that we could grow? Or we have a place like on the city's website you could go and say, these are the best plants for this part of the county or this area? Because I think that's what I'm about.
Okay, I'm going to do two things there. One, I'm going to turf that to the next two speakers who are going to talk about that to some degree. And I'm also going to point out two experts back there, Darren Davidson and Sharon McCann, who are with I don't know, you with county extension, I guess that's where I should say it, right? CSU, county extension. So both of those two do presentations on pollinator plants. Will you raise your hands and wave so that people can see you? So there's some experts right here in the audience that we can direct you to help answer that question as well. And Beth, I think, is going to talk a little bit about that too. So we're going to hold that for later. And then you have a question.
I guess this goes to numbers. I believe that the Fish and Wildlife Service is looking to see if they need to increase protections for I think it's the western bumblebee. Do you know about that? And that would get into the numbers.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Is that Xerces Society that's working on that?
I don't know that anybody who's working on that. That's the Fish and Wild. I don't know who petitioned them. It may. But there's actually two species that the Fish and Wildlife Service is looking at, but I believe one of them is eastern. So you're not aware of what the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing?
No.
Other than the fact that Fish and Wildlife has opted to ban pesticides on its lands, the lands that it manages, that's one thing that they're doing, but in terms of the research, does anybody else in this room know?
Xerces keeps a red list.
Okay.
And I know that they are trying to get certain species of bees and butterflies, monarchs, on the endangered species list.
Rel, can you spell that for people? Xerces Society?
XERCES. They're the World Authority on Invertebrate Conservation. And they have all kinds of information on their website.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to go on with our speakers. Anybody else have another burning question? Sure.
I've heard, and I don't know if it's true, that it's illegal to have dandelions in your yard in Longmont. Is that true?
Yes, it's true.
That is true.
That's too bad.
Okay, so
Authority.
one thing that the Longmont Coalition for People and Pollinators has been working on is we have met with city officials on several occasions and asked them, David might be a little too new to actually know much about this yet, but he was at the last meeting. But we have met with city officials to talk about revising the weed ordinance because of exactly that. And because people have been cited for actually trying to put pollinator gardens in their front yard, and it looked too weedy to somebody in their neighborhood and who complained, and then they got cited. So we actually are working with them, and they're I think they just put out a draft, or they're about to put out a draft for comment to try to address the concerns about the weed ordinance being too restrictive. So we're working on it, and if you'd like to work on it with us, we welcome you.
I was going to put a plug in for Xerces too, because that was one of the things, just before I left the county, we had put a contract in to have actually Xerces come out, and they will work with local farmers to see how you can enhance the habitat around your farm and try to make your farm more pollinator friendly. So the county will be working on that project, I hope still coming up, where they'll actually have Xerces come out, work with staff, and then work with a local farmer to try to do what they call a capstone project, where they'll work with a local farm to help really implement their practices.
Okay, we're gonna go on, and the next speaker is gonna be Beth Conway, and but it was gonna need to queue up our tech diva, to queue up our presentations.
Title we should ever. It's really the farthest from who I am. But I'm trying, getting it in the world. Look at that.
All right. B issues. That looks like me. Let me see if this thing works. Cool. Yes, it does. Okay. So, let's see. We got it. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, that's all right. No stress. Okay, so I'm going to talk about bees, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. Okay, because the State Beekeeping Association has had for the last several years a little mantra that they have repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, and that is reduce your pesticide use, increase your forage planting, okay? And so pretty much everything we have done for the last several years just goes over and over and over that. So when people talk about bee issues, I thought that I would go ahead and pull out the kings of bee research and what they came up with last year for Colorado. This is not Boulder County. This is a nationwide survey conducted by the Bee Informed Partnership in conjunction with some of the major federal agencies across the country. And so you see these total loss figures and average loss figures. Where we've got summer losses anywhere between 18 and 26%, winter losses anywhere between 17 and 48%, and total losses not totaling any of the numbers previous to it, okay, which is always sort of strange to people, is why don't these numbers add up, okay? And the reason that these numbers don't add up is because they include migratory colonies. And so colonies are shifted around the country based upon pollination needs, and so these numbers are going to vary because of that factor, okay? But clearly, 38% total losses and 52% average losses. If this were cattle, if this were pork, pigs, if this were corn, we would be having people really engaged in this topic. But we don't, because these are little tiny things, okay? And they sting. Okay, and so people get totally stressed out about an insect that stings. This insect here is the one that typically stings you. Okay, this is not a honeybee. Does anybody know what this is? This is a western yellow jacket. Okay, this is a ground nesting wasp, although it lives in other dark places. And CSU's Dr. Cranshaw estimates that 90% of all stings are caused by that bug. What's amazing to me is that this is a honeybee, and I don't think the two of them look at all alike. Okay, now I'm sure that people who have cattle can tell their breeds apart too, so I absolutely understand why people cannot tell these two insects apart. But they do not look the same, and the one on the left gives the one on the right a really bad name, okay? Another reason that people don't really want to care about bees, okay, is because they're scared of them, because they sting. And so I have a really hard time believing that that darling little insect is what is the cause of all of this concern. Okay, what people should be stressed out about is that one right there, okay, is the mosquito. Okay, so on the left is the most beneficial insect on the planet, and on the right is the most detrimental insect on the planet.
Mosquitoes are pollinators, they are.
Yes, they are, but they cause a tremendous amount of negative human interaction compared to a honeybee. All right, and we don't even think twice about mosquitoes by and large. We just slap them and go, or we put on our deep infused shirts and head on out for a hike or whatever it is that we do. But the bottom line is that mosquitoes are far, far, far more dangerous than honeybees are. Okay, so monoculture. All right, we've got issues going on out there. One of them is monoculture. Okay, this is the human dietary equivalent of monoculture. Okay, and so grains are carbohydrates. Okay, and that is a carbohydrate sandwich if I've ever seen one. All right, and so insects. I mean, monoculture is to an insect essentially what the sandwich is to us, okay? But we also have urban monoculture, and Rella talked about this, and this is this grass. Actually, I gave this a talk, and this is actually CSU, okay? And this is turf, and turf is more aesthetically pleasing, but every bit as unsubstantial in terms of groceries, okay? So it looks better on the plate, but the bottom line is you're not getting much nutrition out of it, okay? And you're not going to survive on it either. Okay, so what do bees need? Bees and all pollinators need exactly the same thing, okay? They need optimal forage. And optimal forage looks like a well-balanced diet, okay? And in terms of plants, we need 3 seasons of pollen and nectar. We need different colors of flowers. We need different styles of flowers. There is a brochure up front that the State Beekeeping Association, along with BBBC, Boulder County Beekeepers, and the Colorado Master Gardeners have put together that provide, they are Colorado plants that provide those nutritional needs. Please feel free to grab one of those when you leave here. If you need more, you can download it from the state website. You can call me up and we can get them to you. Okay, but we've got plenty of them, and we put them together to try and provide a solution for you right here in Colorado. Okay. This is another alternative that I think is absolutely stunning, okay? And this is a time lawn. For those of you who spend all of that time, you know, every weekend manicuring and grooming your lawn, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to do this. But this had literally a hive of bees on it. And I have no idea who these people are. I just drove by it one day and went, holy mackerel, I gotta have me one of those. And so I have a whole, pound of thyme sitting on my dryer, and we're gonna try it, okay? But even when it's not blooming, it's a low-growing thing, it doesn't have to be mowed, it's a great solution, okay? This is another one that I took while I was just driving around. And this is what's called a health strip. So this is the area between your sidewalk and between the road. That's a pain in the neck to mow, it's a pain in the neck to water, there isn't anything good about it, and these people have put in, honest to God, I think it's like a garden in a box, or it's one of High Country's gardens, little maps that they drew for where to plant